Zoom. She's over in Hoover, so I'm going to pause a couple of times and check in on the chat. If you've got questions or things, do put them over there. Understand, I can't see them live, but when we get to them, I'll touch base with her and we'll see how things are going there. But again, my name is Gene Kerns. I am with Renaissance, and I'm going to share something with you today that is available to everybody. So even though I'm with a company, what I'm sharing is available to every single school out there in the country. A little bit of background about me. Really, nobody cares what you've done before. They care what you can do for them today. And I'm excited about what I can do for you today. So please do use the chat to interact. I also put my Twitter handle there. I gotta admit, I'm not the best at all the social media platforms, but I do love it when a little bit of a Twitter storm gets going. So if those of you who are online are also online over there, I'd love to see some activity, and I'd appreciate it as well. Again, I am with Renaissance, where I serve as the Vice President and Chief Academic Officer, and I am so proud of the work that we've been doing lately. We always like to acknowledge our corporate mission. You know, everybody's got one, but we try to live it maybe more than the average company. Succinctly stated, Renaissance's mission is to accelerate learning for all. And I am so proud that we literally have what I'm going to show you today represents giving away $1 million worth of intellectual property. That is something that is incredibly valuable to schools in the moment that we find ourselves in right now. Now, this is just going to be on chat. It says poll, so don't expect a poll to pop up here. But again, Jan's kind of monitoring chat. Here's what I'd like to know. Think back to the spring. I'm going to ask you to just give me a little bit of feedback. On a scale of 1 to 4, with 4 being the best. So again, 1 to 4, 4 being the best. How would you rate what you were able to do last spring in terms of the remote teaching and learning that you did? Would you say it's a 4, it was stellar? Would you say it was a 3, it was pretty good, but needed some improvement? Would you say it was a 2? You know, you know that there was definitely room for improvement, or would you rate it as low as a 1? Jan, can you let me know what you might be seeing over there on Hoover chat?
I sure can. Right now, people are thinking, they're pondering, and I will let you know when we have results.
Yeah, again, scale 1 to 4. 4, you knocked it out of the park last spring in terms of your remote learning. 3 is you did some pretty good stuff. You feel pretty proud about it.
Yeah.
2 is you did something, but you could have done more, you feel. And 1 is, whoa, don't want to talk about last spring.
Right now, we're seeing 2s and 3s, a little bit more 3s than 2s.
Well, awesome that you're honest, because I have been on some meetings where I've asked people that and they've rated themselves 4, and I just say, I don't see how. I don't see who was walking around with an emergency learning program in their back pocket ready to go at a moment's notice. And here's a little bit of a freedom piece. Paul Kirschner, who is a professor in Belgium, he has a video on YouTube. He said, don't call what you did last spring distance learning. It's not. We know a lot about distance learning. We know what tools it takes. We know what resources are required. We know what training you need to have. And we had none of those things. We had none of the tools. We had none of the training. We had none of the preparation. So as a result, Kirschner says, don't call what you did last spring distance learning. It wasn't. What you did last spring was emergency remote teaching. And he said, if I were to give you a visual image, think about an operating room in a hospital. You got all the equipment, you got all the training, you got all the preparation, and you weren't working in an operating room last spring. You were working in an emergency field hospital. Think like MASH, for those of you that remember that sitcom. You know, some preparation, some training, but not the best conditions to be doing what you're doing. So even if what we did last spring, you know, wasn't all the way up to par, we got to give ourselves a little credit. Nobody was walking around with a plan in their back pockets. But let's talk about what we're beginning to face this fall and how we meet any eventuality. Actually, I have a session tomorrow where I'll go through our How Kids Are Performing report. I'll show you what we've learned about the nature of the COVID slide. But let's talk about today how we deal with any eventuality. I'm using this report from the New Teacher Project. It is simply, as it says, one that is a placeholder. There are easily a half a dozen other reports that all make the same recommendation to us about how we're going to address the disruptions in learning, the learning loss that we may have seen from students, and they all begin with prioritize. Prioritize, prioritize, prioritize. We don't have time to be doing everything. There's no way we possibly could. And so the way that we're going to do the best for our students, because we have lost ground to recover from last year while still keeping things going this year when we understand that the conditions are far from ideal. The very best way that we can serve our kids is to focus in on those things that really matter the most. We cannot cover all standards and we cannot cover all skills. So we need to make informed decision about what matters the most. But here's the challenge. Here's an article from June in Education Week. And what the author of this article pointed out was that 17 states had all given their schools the very guidance that you saw in this previous report. 17 states had all told their schools the same thing. Prioritize your time and your attention on those things that matter the most. But of the 17 states that had given that recommendation, only 2 had ever published any documents that help teachers understand what the most important skills and knowledge are. Because let's be clear, we've never been able to cover all of our standards. In fact, Mike Schmoker, one of my favorite authors, he said, if you think really good instruction is going to be guided by your standards, it's not quite the case. He said, take whatever list of standards somebody gave you, cut it in half, and throw away half. But the most challenging part is to know which half to keep. Because within our standards are things that are absolutely critical, commingled with other things that are very nice to have extras. And we have no time this year for extras. In fact, we had no time in any year for them. In seeking to close the performance gaps that we've often had, we've got to get kids what they need the most. And at Renaissance, we realized that we had an answer. And this is the $1 million worth of content that we gave away, because this answer used to only be available to customers of our assessments. And we made a decision to post this, make it publicly available, give it away. And I'm going to show it to you today because we have a resource that we refer to as Focus Skills. And it is a list of the most essential skills for learning, reading, and mathematics by grade across all grades, tailored to every single state. Here's how we do that. Whenever we build our assessments, we look at the state standards for every state. So for example, if you're in Texas, it's the TEKS, the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills. If you're in Virginia, it's the SOLs, the Standards of Learning. If you're in many states, these are the Common Core, some derivative of that. We take whatever standard set has been approved by a given state and we make a custom fitted garment. We make that garment by taking those standards and breaking them down into the discrete teachable skills, things that would become the basis of an individual lesson. And so we are always taking standards and breaking them down and analyzing them. And as we did that, the content experts that we worked with, which not only included people in Renaissance, but experts around the world on reading and math content, as we unpacked the standards and broke them down into the discrete teachable skills, we identified a subcategory of skills that we refer to as focus skills, and the definition of that is given here. Focus skills are those skills that are considered to be essential underpinnings or foundations for future learning. In other words, in the tool that I'm about to show you, it will show you the essential pieces of reading and math content, things that you must learn at a certain point, because at some point in the future learning rests upon what you learned prior. So prerequisites in a way. For those of you that think about things perhaps a bit more visually, focus skills would be like the foundations and the load-bearing walls of a structure. Now, many of us have filled our extra time at home by watching HGTV, and it doesn't take very long on any HGTV program that there is before there will be a conversation about load-bearing walls. They want to renovate the house, and they say, is this a load-bearing wall or not? Because if it's a load-bearing wall, we can't just rip it out. We'll have to do something to backfill there. But if it's a non-load-bearing wall, we can take it out, move it around, and change it and not have so much of a problem. Well, focus skills are the foundations and the load-bearing walls of content. The other skills, again, are nice to have extras, like non-load-bearing walls that do things in our houses, but we can afford to do without them and move them around a little bit. Let me give you an example, and I'll use a foreign country that way I don't offend any state. I was working with schools in England one time, and they were looking at the year level, because over there it's year levels, not grades. And they were looking at the year level that they were teaching, and there were a lot of really important skills around place value. And anybody that understands mathematics well, you've got to understand place value well before you can get to more advanced concepts in mathematics. At that very same year level, there were some standards that talked about Roman numerals. Now, let's be clear, if a student misses place value or struggles with that, their forward progress in mathematics is going to be severely impeded. But if a student doesn't cover Roman numerals in depth, there's just not anything equally as bad that is going to happen. So let me give you a couple examples at a high level, and then I will show you how to see the focus skills for reading and math in any state in which you work. So for California, when we took their math standards and broke them down, what we found is there were a little over 1,000 skills, 1,051 to be precise, 27% of which qualified to be focus skills. So here's the 27% that teachers in California should view as being absolutely non-negotiable. And here's the other 73% that they can afford to be a bit more flexible with. In Texas, it looks something like this. The Texas TEKS break down into 931 discrete skills, 19% of which are focus skills. So with mathematics, it's often 19 up to 27, 28%. But I'm going to ask you to make a prediction here. And again, I'm going to call Jan back on to help me with this. What I'd like to know is what grade level, so K to 8, or course, because in high school, math turns into Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2 in most grade levels. What grade level or course do you think will have the highest number of focus skills of them all? Make a prediction, if you will, and in just a minute, I will show you whether your predictions were true or not. Again, what grade level or course? So you can vote for kindergarten up through 8, or Algebra 1, Geometry, or Algebra 2. Where is it that you think the most heavy lifting occurs when it comes to mathematics? Jan, are we having some predictions, I hope?
We have a 6th grade, 5th, a 1st.
6th, 5th, 1st. Very good, very good.
3rd grade in mathematics.
3rd.
Yes. So we're still in the intermediate and just bumping into the middle grades. So 3rd, 1st, 5th, and 6th is what we have so far.
Well, we'll find out the answer in just a minute. And honestly, I think sometimes people predict the grade that they teach. We all feel like, ours is the hardest. Here's what it looks like for the country. In most states, it's Algebra 1 that has the highest number of focus skills. Now, if you do the math on this really quickly, you'll notice the note down at the bottom. It does not add up to 50 states plus DC, because there's a couple of ties in there. But in most instances, it's Algebra 1 that is by far the hardest thing. Let's look at reading. Take New York's reading standards, break them down, 858 skills, 351 of which are 41%, which is a pretty common sort of percentage. Reading, for whatever reason, tends to have a higher percentage of focus skills, and sometimes based on there being a smaller number of skills. There are 41% of those skills that are focus in nature. You just have to get them. Another example, Florida. Take their standards, break them down into discrete teachable skills. 934 is the result, 398 of which, or 43% of which, qualify as being focus skills. And so, again, make a prediction. What grade level for reading? Now, for reading, you can guess anything from kindergarten all the way up through 12, because our learning progressions for math stop at Algebra 2, but for reading, they go all the way up through 12. So K to 12. What do you think is the grade level that has the highest number of focus skills? And in just a minute, after we see those predictions, I'll show you how to see all of the focus skills for anything about reading or math in any state in which you teach. Jan, what are we seeing?
Let me unmute right now. The reading teachers are thinking about it. So we don't have a response, but Jean, as a former 1st grade reading teacher, I will tell you, I would have said 1st grade.
All right.
Oh, we've got 5th. Fifth
Got
grade
it.
for reading. Excellent. Excellent.
Anybody else? Sometimes we hear a lot of
Second.
third grades, based on
We've got
those third
second
grade,
and fourth. Yeah, second and fifth so far.
second and
Grade
fifth,
9 with a
grade
question
9
mark.
with a question mark. So I'll vote for
Grade
it, but I'm
9.
not so sure.
I might have put an exclamation mark.
Yeah.
So ninth, fifth, second, middle school.
And I will
Yeah.
say, any questions you have, put them in chat. And, again, I'll stop another couple of times and, Jan can let me know whether any questions came up. So please do use that as your vehicle here for that. But let's go ahead and see the answers. Let's again show you what it looks like across the country. And not every state, falls into this bucket, but most do. With reading, there is way more agreement in some ways around the country. And it's almost always first grade, closely followed by kindergarten. Okay, so it's typically first grade or kindergarten. And so you see the numbers there, 45 instances of all possible options because of some ties. It is first grade. And again, it's those first couple of grades of school. So let me show you how to see for any state where the focus skills are, and more importantly, what they are, because ultimately, this is the answer to what is it that I need to prioritize? What is it that I need to focus in on the most? So you see the URL up there on the screen, and I'm sure Jan will put it in chat for you, and I'm going to go there and we'll repeat it again. It's simply our website, renaissance.com/focus skills with a dash between those two words. If you go there, you will be taken to a resource place that we refer to as the Focus Skills Resource Center. Let me make that a little bit larger for folks to see. When you get there, let me point out a couple of things. We're at that URL, renaissance.com/focus skills. If you want more background on these skills and how they were developed, this orange button up at the top will give you that, because it will bring up a research paper that we have that talks about this. If you scroll down just a little bit further, there is a link to a webinar that walks you through this. It is basically what we're doing together today. So if you've had our conversation, there might be a little bit more, but this would be a lot of repetition. But this will stay there, so you can forward that link to anybody for the webinar. And again, you do not have to be a customer of Renaissance to use this resource. We decided to just give it to everybody. So I've come to the section here that really is where the rubber meets the road. The title says Focus Skills by the Numbers. We are looking at Texas. The first time you come there, it may not have a state selected. It might pick it up based on your browser. Whatever state you click to, it will remember that in the future. And often what I find is that when people go here, sometimes this key is off on the side and you just see a chart and you don't really have a way to interpret what the chart says. So I like it when the key is on, because when the key is on, I can look at these domain headings over the side that let me know, for example, anything that is violet in color is emergent literacy, reading skills like phonological awareness, alphabet knowledge. And if I look at pre-K, that's almost all that's happening right there. Anything that we see that is orange is foundational language skills. Anything that is green is comprehension. And so as I hover over these different grades by looking at the segments that make up their stacked bar graphs and then knowing what the key to them is over there, I can get some kind of understanding of what's happening at these different grade levels. And you notice that as I hover over any particular grade, the bar becomes expanded. Up at the top, it says view. It also says, for example, here is grade 1 in Texas. If you'd like to see the 47 focus skills that relate there, there's one of two things you can do. You can click on any segment of the bar. So for example, if you know that, comprehension skills is this deepest green, I can click on that and it'll pop up and tell me, here are the 6 focus skills for comprehension skills. But honestly, most people don't do that. Most people go in, they choose the grade that they're interested in, and they press the view button up at the top. So let's click view up at the top of grade 3 and take a look at what we see there. When you drill into that, you're going to begin to be able to see all skills. I do point out something here I think is kind of important. Whenever I go to this level, I always encourage teachers to look at the column that says focus skills over on the far right and look for the largest number for any one domain. So for example, for literacy at grade 3 in Texas, the domain of comprehension response skills has 9 focus skills in it, more than any other. That tells me a little bit of something about how the content at that grade level is prioritized. So to see those 9 skills, all I need to do is press the plus button. It will become expanded and it will list, and here they are, the focus skills. When you get this listing, you see a couple of things. You see the name of the skill. You see the full description, which will sometimes give you far more details or examples. In mathematics, it might have some boundaries. In other words, perform this operation with numbers up to 100 or anything like that. So you saw the name, you see the full descriptions. You also see this referencing that is a reference to the standards coding. So if you want to know how this focus skill from Renaissance plugs back into your standards, the TEKS in this case, you would look at English Language Arts and Reading Standard 3.7.D. Now remember that the focus skills are designed to be discrete teachable skills, and sometimes standards include multiple skills, and we were unpacking them. So it is possible to see exactly what you see here. Here's a focus skill that supports the standard 3.7.D. And here's another focus skill that also supports that very same standard. And here's one that supports 3.7.C and another one that supports 3.7.C, because again, standards are often larger in grain size. And when you unpack them into the discrete teachable skills, sometimes you see more than one focus skill that supports the same standard. We also get a lot of questions about this last column where it says position. What does 349 mean and 350 and 372? Okay. Now remember that we take the standards, we unpack them. In the case of Texas, there were over 900 reading skills. This is the 349th skill in that order. This is the 350th skill in that order. And then you see some jumps. For example, we see some at 372, then they jump up to 375. What happened to 373 and 374? Well, remember, the focus skills are the most essential ones. There are other skills in the progression that are not focus skills. They are the nice to have extra things. They occupy their own positions. And so you don't see the skill in position 373 and 374 here because they are not focus skills. In this tool, we're trying to show you the most essential ones. It also often throws off people when they see, for example, why is this same skill repeated? The same skill in position 375. It says the same name. It says the same description. The reason that it is repeated is because what you see is it supports standard 3.7.G and standard 3.7.C. So we are always driven by your standards. If we unpack your standards and it results in a focus skill and we unpack it again and it results in the same focus skill, we repeat it. So I encourage teachers to look for those focus skills that are repeated here, because what that means is these are of particular importance. Now, let me pause for just a second and see if Jan's gotten any questions there on chat about anything that I've walked to and anything that I've shown. Jan?
No, just a couple of things that I put in there. I did put in the URL. So attendees may want to do that. But at this point, we don't have any questions.
All right, well, let's stop playing in language arts and let's go play in math for those people that are more mathematically inclined. Jan, help me out with this next thing here. I want to make sure that we kind of really meet somebody's needs. So I'm about to demonstrate with math. So the first person to name their state, I will demo with your state. So let's see who the fastest is on the keyboard. What state would you like to see the math content for?
All right, we're waiting. Colorado.
All right, Colorado is fast on the keyboard today. So again, it's just a drop down. I'm going to choose Colorado. Here's the literacy profile, as typical in most states, first one, grade 1 with the most focus skills, but we're going to look at math this time. So I simply click math and I toggle over and it's going to change and it's going to rebuild it. And there it is, a very typical profile with Algebra 1 having the most. Let's see who the second fastest, or maybe the same person can win it again. Choose the grade that I'm going to demo with. What grade do you want to see? Sorry, Jan, I'm making you mute and unmute a whole lot there, but trying to make it meet everybody's needs.
No worries. All right, what grade would you like to see? We're waiting. And in math, do we have a preference on grade? 10th. 10th
Okay.
and 3rd.
That will turn into geometry. Well, we'll do both very quickly. So again, it's the same thing. You see the domains over there. So for geometry, I hover over it. Now notice there's a whole lot of green here, which shouldn't be shocking because, that is geometry. Okay. So again, I hover over, I click view skills, it drills down into it. Now these domains and these headings that we see, the way that the standards are organized, this comes right from your state. We don't change a thing there. Okay, so we use the very same headings that you do within your state standards. So again, let's take a look at it. Let's see where the highest number of focus skills, actually the highest number relates to right angles, triangles, and trigonometry. So let's expand that one. Again, here are the focus skills. Here's their full description. Here is their standards coding back into the standards. Here is their position. And let's go back and let's take a look at, I think you said grade 3, Jan. It was 3 or 4, I heard.
It was 3.
It was 3. So let's look at grade 3. So again, it's all going to behave the same way. It doesn't matter what content area or grade level we're in. Again, look for the highest number. Highest number is in operations and algebraic thinking. That's interesting for grade 3. But let's assume I'm teaching 3rd grade math in Colorado right now, and I'm working on my geometry unit. It helps me to understand that these are the most essential skills for the grade level. Like this is what kids really have to get about geometry at grade 3, but maybe as I start working on my geometry unit this year, I find that my students are really struggling, and that's no surprise because we know how 2nd grade finished up last year. So if you find that your kids are struggling with your grade level content, then perhaps you'd like to use the drop down over on the side here to toggle back to the previous grade. And in many instances, you can find the very same domain that you're working on. There's geometry from grade 2, because remember, these are the foundations. These are the things you had to get from the grade level before. So if your students are struggling with on grade level content, it's probably because one of these most essential prerequisites wasn't finished out. So it's really good to look backwards through there. Now, you've got the web page, but for some people, they want to print it out and touch it. There's 2 ways you can do that. Yeah.
Gina, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we had 2 very relevant comments and questions
Yes,
that you dug into, and I just want to ask these participants if they need more information. Both questions were about teaching students who are multiple grades in mathematics below where they need to be.
Yes.
And you talked about the backward mapping. I didn't know if you wanted to say more or if either one of the attendees had a follow-up question for you.
Yeah, and I have a picture a little bit for that a little bit later. The focus skills are the most essential thing. So if you are having kids that are struggling with what the level is that you're doing, go back a level, try to find the same domain and work with the skills there. If they, if you feel like they get them there and you get back up. If a kid's really, really farther behind, you might need to go back another grade level or even more. It kind of depends on, what is the gap that is there. But these skills, what you need to understand about focus skills is they are non-negotiable. It's like saying you can't build a solid house unless the foundation is really, really good. Trying to build on top of a foundation that is less than adequate is going to be very problematic. So it's always a good thing if kids are struggling to work back to these things, because these are the foundations that must be fixed. If the foundations are fixed and made strong, then again, the future learning can be placed on top of that. So drilling back through there, again, you can use the web version, but for some people, they just have to print it out. Okay, so there is a print grade feature. I really don't like this one all that much, but I want to show it to you so you know it's there. It will print out one grade level of focus skills. So it's this print grade button over here in the corner. That's just fine. But what I actually really prefer is this orange box up here. Now, if we were in literacy, it would say Colorado literacy. This is available for every state. We have what we call educator workbooks. So if I click there, it's going to open up a PDF document that has all of the focus skills for all of the grades. Now, it's about a 30, 40-page booklet, so you might not want to print out all of the booklet, but you certainly could print your grade level and then maybe the grade level before and the grade level after, and then go back and get more if you need. Let me show you what's in here and why I like it. First of all, there's a little bit of background about how focus skills were developed. There's also this table that shows you the domains of mathematics and the grades in which they appear. So, for example, notice that algebra is the domain of algebra and operations and algebraic thinking up through 5. And then it starts turning into the more specific domains, such as expressions and functions and creating equations. So you can't always go back and find the very same domain. Geometry is almost like the universal language, because geometry tends to, in most standard sets, be the domain that's very consistent the whole way through. So basically, what we're looking at is saying geometry is taught in all grade levels. There's nothing about geometry, of course, in Algebra 1. And then geometry becomes a very specific series of subdomains in its own geometry course. So this table is helpful. A little bit of information about how to use the workbook, how to read it. And there's what we were talking about. If you're trying to catch a kid up, the fastest path is to cover the focus skills. We're going to come back to that one a little bit later. But most of this booklet simply lists the focus skills in order all the way through the grades. But there's a couple of cool things I do want to point out about this workbook. Let's look at grade 5. One thing is, when we interviewed teachers, they were emphatic that they wanted some room where they could write. They want to write down the names of students they've checked on that either do or do not have the skill in place. They want to write down lesson ideas. They want to write down important details about a particular skill. They want to write a page number that corresponds with their textbook, whatever. They wanted room for sure. The other thing that they said was helpful was if there was some color coding. So each domain is color coded. These domain color codes match the website. So it's orange in the booklet for data, statistics, and probability. It's orange on the website. What that also means is if I'm using this workbook and I'm teaching grade 5, data, stats, and probability, and again, my kids are struggling, then the way I go back quickly to find it before is to just scroll back to grade 4 and look for the same color. There are the 2 focus skills from the previous grade level that relate to the unit that I was teaching right now. These may be the gaps in learning that I need to address if my kids are struggling with the grade level content. Go back, fill in those gaps, and then go right back up to the grade level content and try to move to work forward from there. So again, those workbooks are available when you are within the tool. It's always up there. If you're in the literacy side and you're drilled down into there, it would say your state and it would say literacy. So let's just drop to another state really quickly. Let's look at South Dakota. So there's South Dakota's profile coming up. I can drill into literacy. Once I get into literacy and look at a given grade, like grade 1, there's the South Dakota literacy PDF. And also too, one last place is when you just get to that first level, that landing page of the Focus Skills Resource Center, we've spent most of our time in this section, Focus Skills by the numbers, because that's really where most users go. But if you scroll down just a little bit further, you get a map of the whole country. And you can click on any state that you're interested in, and it'll pop up with the option of getting the literacy or the math workbook for that state, okay? So you just click either of those and you'll get that full PDF. So that's the Focus Skills Resource Center. I think I've shown you the most important things, but I do want to go back into my presentation and give you a couple of big ideas about working with focus skills. But let me pause while I'm still in the center and ask Jan whether there's anything in chat, or Jan works in the center too. Is there anything else, Jan, I forgot to show that you think's important other than night mode? You know, if you're keeping your spouse up at night planning, you can put in night mode so the colors coming off the screen aren't quite the same. Do we have any questions or anything else we want to highlight while I'm still in the tool?
We don't have questions now.
All right.
And I don't have anything to add, Gene.
All right. I must have done it right then. So when we get back to here, I just want to end up with a couple of last ideas. First of all, math teachers. And I know there's got to be some folks on the line because I forgot who, but somebody asked for geometry. I want to point out two things about supporting kids with high school math content that actually make it a little bit harder. Because if you think about it, up through 8th grade, we do integrated mathematics. So all the subjects are woven together. But in high school, in most states, not all, but in most states, we start breaking it into those courses. And that may actually create some problems as we start to help students overcome the disruptions related in COVID. So for example, imagine kids that were in Algebra 1 last year. They were in that course that in most cases has the highest number of focus skills, and it was a very disrupted year. This year, most of them are not in an algebra classroom anymore. They're in the geometry classroom. And in all honesty, most geometry teachers aren't going to feel a tremendous need to go back and do a whole lot of review of algebra. Their kids don't need a review of algebra to be successful in the geometry classroom. So what that means is we won't pick up on some of the gaps that these students have until year after this, when those same kids show up in the Algebra 1 classroom. That's when we will begin to see their gaps. So the bad news is they'll still have some gaps and we won't see them for about 2 years. The good news is we have 2 years to plan to address them. Now, let's also think about students that were in geometry last year. Most of the students that were in geometry last year and again had a disrupted course, they're showing up in our Algebra 2 classrooms this year. And again, Algebra 2 teachers are not terribly motivated to be reviewing geometry because it's not part of their course. I'm not placing any blame. I'm just pointing out something. But you know what? The students who took geometry had a very disrupted experience, and some of them may be sitting down to take ACT or SAT tests because they aspire to go on to college. And we know that those tests are heavily laden with geometry. And so if I were still in high school administration, I'd want to be talking about how we could do something after school or in the evenings or weekend or sometime a special camp or something where we could go back and finish out some of the unfinished learning from geometry, lest some of our students be put in the situation of sitting down for, you know, a fairly consequential test that may open or close doors for them in their future without the prerequisites from that course. So think about how the sequence of these courses may impact students and their progress forward. But let me end with two really important ideas around focus skills, because some of this already came up. I heard it based on the chat that Jan was telling me. Ultimately, you want to know, how do I plan instruction that does the greatest benefit for kids? How do we really meet kids where they are and move them ahead, get them to that promise of the brightest future that we can generate for them? And in doing that, I want to share two considerations with you. One is this graphic, and Jan probably has the URL handy. If not, I'll get it at the end and paste it in. If you simply just type into Google deciding what to teach, here's how in Education Week, it'll be the #1 thing that comes back. It is a infographic done by the editors of Education Week, obviously, where they took the recommendations from multiple reports, like the one that I showed you in the very beginning, and they boiled all of those recommendations down into this awesome little flow chart that says, how should we plan optimal instruction for kids, particularly in a year that is following a very disrupted year before. So step #1, they say, is be well aware of the standards of the grade level that you are teaching and identify those things that are the absolute priority in that grade. Well, think about how the Focus Skills Resource Center helps you with that, because you can see what the focus skills are. And I think the reason that step number one is determine what is priority, because again, you're not going to be able to cover everything this year. We're going to have to go slower. We're going to have to address unfinished learning. So we've got to be clear about what we must do with students in this year in terms of their skills, and what we can afford to be a little bit more flexible with, like Roman numerals. And then they say, okay, once you're very clear about what matters the most in your grade, start your planning and work to do your grade level instructions. If you're teaching 7th grade math, do everything you can to teach 7th grade math. If you're teaching 4th grade reading, do everything you can to be working with on grade level content. However, as you are seeking to plan those grade level units, ask yourself, what are the essential prerequisites? What are the things that kids had to have had, particularly from the grade level before, to be successful with my grade level unit? And do not assume anything. Once you've identified those prerequisites, then move to step 3, which is do a little quick quiz or an activity and check to see whether students have mastered those prerequisites or not. If they have, great. Go back to your grade level instruction. If they have not, then you have to move on to step 4, which is to do some type of just-in-time review. I'm working on my geometry unit. I find a gap. I fill it just in time. I do a review of an essential skill right in the moment in the context that the student needs it. And if you move to step 4 and you had to do some just-in-time review, then you're also going to have to also go to step 5, which is to do another quiz or quick activity to gauge whether or not your review was successful. Did students get it? And of course, if it wasn't, you have to go back and repeat a little bit there. But the whole sequence then is, let's just go back through the top really quickly. Know what is most important in your grade level. You're going to have to cover it. Try to do as much grade level instruction as you can, but thoughtfully think about the prerequisites, which would involve doing quick checks on them, immediate just-in-time review as necessary, and additional formative assessment pieces in the form of step number 5 to determine whether or not your review was successful. This is really some of the very best thinking from multiple groups distilled into sort of a flow chart for you to follow in planning instruction this year. And as I said before, if you're trying to help students catch up, if you're trying to help close gaps, you don't have time to cover everything, but if you work through the focus skills with them, you can be very highly effective. Again, we want to make sure that we cover those things that students must absolutely have for future learning. But if there are skills that are not focus in nature, we can afford to be far more flexible with those than any that are identified as being focus skills. Let me pause for a minute then and see if anything came in chat, because I'm getting down to my last idea here. It won't take but just a minute, but let me check with Jan and see how folks are doing out there, just because I can't see. Jan?
Everyone's doing well. We're in
All
good
right.
shape.
Good enough. Good enough. So I want to end with this, and notice the subtitle here: the most important consideration about focus skills. So I think that, if you get nothing else about focus skills and how to implement them, this is the number one idea that I want you to realize. And that is that they are absolutely critical, completely non-negotiable. I'll use a perspective that comes from an Italian economist from the 1800s. His name is Pareto. And as a result, people write about his work as Pareto's principle or the Pareto law. Sometimes it's called the law of the vital few or the 80-20 rule. Because here's what Pareto said. Pareto said it seems that about 80% of the results that we get come from about 20% of our activities. And Doug Lemov, who wrote Teach Like a Champion and many other education books, he called out Pareto's ideas in his book, Practice Perfect. And he said the 80-20 rule that Pareto started is a pattern that seems to hold true again and again and again. It turns out that in most domains of study, roughly 80% of the proficiency that we gain comes from about 20% of the skills we learn. In other words, we learn the basics or the core of the domain really well. And when we learn the core very well, we go all the way up to 80% performance. Okay. The other possible skills, the other 80% of the things that we can learn, they close the gap from 80% proficiency up to 100. But what Lemov says is teachers need to understand what the core of the domains that they are teaching and focus there, because when you focus there, you get all the way up to 80%. Now, Pareto said, and Lemov echoed 80-20, and that's not exactly what our analysis found. If you remembered, often math was about 27% focus skills. So maybe not the 80-20 rule, but in math, it might be the 27-73 rule. And often in reading, it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 42 or 43%. So not 80-20 over there, but 43-57. It's still huge to be able to say to a teacher, let's narrow this down to, half of the skills are the most critical. But then Doug gives a cautionary statement. He says, don't think that because the skills that are being identified in I'll use his 80-20 numbers, but you understand that they are more. He says, don't think that it's 20% of the skills that matter the most. And so you teach them 20% of the time. No, no, no. With these skills, they may be 20% of the skills, but we're going to spend 40, 60, 65, 75% of our time working on these skills, because with these skills, with those things that are the most important, our goal must be excellence, total mastery on the part of our students. We do not want to stop when they seem to generally know how to do it, or when they do it well enough, or when they are somewhat proficient. We want to keep working with them until they are excellent. In the same way, as any of you has ever built a house, you do not want to rush the building of the foundation. You want it to be the right workers using the right materials in the right ways under the right atmospheric conditions, because you want that foundation to be as strong as it possibly can be, because nothing can make up for that foundation being compromised. So when it comes to focus skills, we have a goal of absolute excellence, which means we're going to work with them until students are high level in their performance there. Perhaps more succinctly stated is the way that Doug put it here. He says, our goal then as educators is to help our students be great at the most important things. The Focus Skills Resource Center tells you what the most important things are. Our work then as teachers is to create the activities that help our students become great at those things. If we do that, we will unquestionably deal with any learning loss that we've seen, any COVID slide. And that work in any form is powerful work in helping students reach the greatest amount of potential or promise that is within them. So we'll see if there's any questions before we get wrapped up. Maybe, maybe not. Jan?
I've just encouraged everyone to submit questions and see where we are. But at this point, we'll wait another moment, but at this point, we're good.
Two things I will note is, one, we put the Focus Skills Resource Center up in a response to COVID. We do not plan on taking it down. So we believe that it will be a permanent fixture on the Renaissance site. So 5, 10, 15 years from now, at least the way I envision it, that will still be there. The other thing is we update it continually. So if a state changes their standards, as Texas did with high school English language arts last year, we build a new learning progression and we identify new focus skills coded to those new standards. Those updates come out every year in July. So if you know, for example, that your state is going to go through a new adoption of standards, we follow that process the whole way through, and we roll out new updates every July. So if you have new standards, you can watch the Resource Center and you will see your new headings and your new domains and your new skills appear in there each year somewhere around mid-July. Any questions then, Jan? Anything else?
No questions here. I just thank the attendees, Jean. People were engaged and asked thoughtful questions. So thank you so much.
Well, very good. Thank you, Jan, and thank you to Deborah and others for hosting and doing all the behind scenes work that is so critical to pull off a conference in these unusual times. We appreciate the opportunity. We do hope that you will reach out to us. I know we've got some virtual booths and all those kinds of things going on. Visit renaissance.com/focus skills. And if you've got any questions, call in. We've got a whole team of people standing by to help you with that if you have any questions. I'm very pleased with the site. It's very intuitive. It's very easy to use. But if you do bump into anything, please do let us know. We're standing by to help, because we want to make sure that we truly do live into that mission of accelerating learning for all. And that means just helping schools and doing everything we can. So we appreciate it. Back to Deborah. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Be sure to visit sponsor exhibit booths over lunch, and don't forget to complete your session feedback. Enjoy a few minutes of break, and our next session will start at 10:15. Thank you for attending, and thank you, Jean and Jan, for the excellent presentation.
Thanks, Deborah, and we'll see you tomorrow, where we'll talk about COVID slide. What have we learned? So that'll be an exciting one too. We hope some folks will join us.
Fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you so much.